Thank you. We are ready to begin the oversight hearing for the Joint Legislative Audit Committee now that we have Assemblymember Chris Norby here. We have a lot of people who are going to be in and out or unable to make it to this oversight hearing since there's several hearings going on this afternoon. But since it's an oversight hearing, we can proceed and start with our agenda. So I really wanted to preface that this is a follow-up to the January oversight hearing that we had where we began to review the state auditor's audits regarding the statewide use and implementation of ARA funds that came out of an audit request that we approved in this committee to take some early action to make sure that we're doing everything we can to get that ARA funding out and that we're also doing it as quick as possible, but also as carefully as possible so that we have the internal controls that we need to make sure that we're tracking the data the way that we need to track it and everybody's able to keep good records about how the money was used. Let's see. We have two panels today. And we're going to try to move pretty quickly on the first panel so that we can really get into the details with each particular program, which is going to be our second panel. But I want to thank Mr. Norby for being here because without you, we probably wouldn't be starting at this hour.
Chair. We'll do it as best we can.
Did you want to say some beginning remarks since you're here?
The Joint Legislative Audit Committee is just as it sounds, joint, Senate, Assembly, legislative, to pass laws. But instead of passing laws, we're here to audit. Audit is the Latin root, correct me if I'm wrong, for listening, right? Auditory. And auditors listen. But we have to do more than listen. We have to process and hopefully do something with the information that we have. So this is one of my most important committees, and one which I look forward to. But as you say, we're juggling a lot of things, so some of us will be in and out. But if not here in body, we'll be here in spirit. And this is an opportunity, too, presumably, to audit exactly what the federal government is doing for us, with us, to us, and because of us. And so look forward to the proceedings, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. As most of you know, we're in some pretty extraordinary, unprecedented times, and the ARA funding promises $85 billion for California. We certainly want to see the benefits of that as soon as possible, but we also want to make sure that we're diligent in our role for oversight. So with that, I'd like to bring up the State Auditor, Elaine Howell. Actually, our entire panel, if Laura Chick can also come up, and Rick Rice. Laura Chick, as you know, is the Inspector General for ARA Oversight, and Rick Rice is the current Director of the California Recovery Task Force. But we will begin with the State Auditor, Elaine Howell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members. For the record, my name is Elaine Howell, California State Auditor, and I will keep my opening comments relatively brief, as difficult as that is for me. No, I'm just kidding. I will keep them very brief so that we all have the opportunity to speak. The State Auditor's Office is on an annual basis responsible for conducting what's called the single audit. As many of you are aware, that's an audit on an annual basis of the federal dollars that come into the state of California, a variety of federal programs. Many of those same programs are the programs that California received Recovery Act money for. So what we decided to do early on last year is, shortly after the Recovery Act was passed and signed by President Obama, is to do some risk assessments and determine which agencies that we've looked at in the past have had problems, because perhaps those are the agencies that we would need to get into and do some early preparedness work, and that's what we did. In addition to that, this committee and other committees in the legislature asked my office to present testimony about the single audit, talk a little bit about the Recovery Act and what the implications were for California. and certainly the Inspector General and the representatives from the Governor's Office, the task force, presented at those hearings as well, as far as how is California going to be well prepared to administer these dollars that are coming into California. So we presented testimony at a variety of hearings. What my office decided to do is issue some interim reports rather than waiting 9 months, which is traditional for issuing the single audit. We said that we would issue some interim reports to give the administration the opportunity to correct any issues that we identified either as part of the single audit or some of the Recovery Act auditing that we were doing. So we issued a series of interim reports last year. As Madam Chair indicated, the Audit Committee was very proactive in asking my office to do some audit work of some federal programs that were receiving significant federal dollars under the Recovery Act, but those programs would not be programs that we would traditionally look at under the single audit because traditionally they're very, very small. So they wouldn't be material enough for my office to look at them. But the committee asked me to present that risk assessment, and based on that, the chair and other members of the committee requested my office to do an audit of 5 programs that we deemed high risk, including the state energy program was specifically identified by committee members. So we conducted those reports and issued them individually over the course of 4 or 5 months. What we're going to talk about today is the results of 3 of those and some of the follow-up work that we've done very, very recently to identify the progress or the status of those recommendations and how well the agencies have implemented them. And in short, we think there's been progress in some areas, but unfortunately in some other areas I'll be pointing out that we were a little disappointed. We would have hoped to have seen more progress. So a mixed review as far as my office is concerned. So with that, I think I'll stop there and allow the other members of the panel to be able to provide their testimony. If members have any questions, I'm certainly available to answer anything now or as we get into the 3 entities, as we discuss those specific reports. I certainly am happy to answer any questions at that time.
Thank you. And next, it's nice to have the Inspector General, Laura Chick, back. Always appreciate having you to this committee, so thank you for coming again. And I understand you're going to provide us with an update of some of the oversight work that you've been doing to complement the auditor's work, and thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Madam Chair. From the beginning, besides offering up, as you say, $85 billion to help rev our economy here in California, the Recovery Act has presented to government at every level an opportunity to do things differently and better. Even though the money has come down and out much in the same old ways, there is tracking and scrutinizing and eventual evaluation that is unprecedented. The Office of Recovery Inspector General has as its focus rebuilding the public's trust and confidence that government can actually spend their dollars wisely and well. When I last testified before your committee, January 20th, my office had just received 6 auditors borrowed from other departments so that I could begin to follow the recovery money out on the streets. I want to stress we are not doing traditional audits. Instead, we are using audits and readiness assessments as clues where to look, but my teams are going out and taking very focused looks, not at the departments as much as the subrecipients, the money out on the streets in our neighborhoods, and looking at how recovery dollars are spent. We're finishing these reviews in a matter of weeks instead of months. To date, we have almost completed 17 reviews. We have 11 posted and 6 more on their way. Where have we looked? Significant dollars were given early on to workforce investment boards up and down the state. My teams have reviewed work investment boards in Tulare County, Oakland, and San Francisco. We're currently looking at Monterey and Los Angeles counties. While we found no significant issues in San Francisco, we did find problems in Tulare and Oakland. For instance, in Tulare, the WIB allocated $1 million in overhead out of $3 million for the summer youth program. My auditors found that the correct amount should have been $60,000 instead of $1 million. The WIB agreed, and that almost $1 million is being reprogrammed back into the summer youth activities this summer. In Oakland, we found recovery dollars paid for trips to Water Park, paid for rent, bus passes, salaries, and car allowances, which were all non-allowable expenses. While the state unemployment level is 12%, it is a whopping 19% in Tulare County and 17% in Oakland. And if the unemployment was a whole lot better, it's still essential that the dollars for workforce training and youth employment preparedness are actually meeting their intended purposes. When we were looking at San Bernardino County's spending of temporary assistance to needy families, we found that they'd not spent their regular grant dollars, which they needed to do before receiving recovery money. And so we found that the state's Social Services Department was lax in its oversight of San Bernardino County and in awarding the funds prematurely. Another big part of what we're doing is helping state agencies at the front end improve their oversight. And so we've recently issued a monitoring tool advisory to give as best practice example to departments. Here's something without any more resources, without any new money or new staff, a model, a tool on how you can do better oversight and monitoring of contracts. Where we are going next, we will be going in to look at the High-Speed Rail Authority to see what they are doing in response to implementing recommendations from the Bureau of State Audit, which they should do before they get any recovery dollars, which are on their way. We're also going to be looking at individual Caltrans projects, specifically local contractors, and weatherization dollars are finally being spent in significant amounts. We are currently reviewing a project in Southern California. I wanted to end by talking about some of the benefits of doing early preventative work. For instance, as we've looked at 1 or 2 work investment boards and found problems, the word is out up and down the state that we've got people out looking, what we have found, and these are not unique boo-boos or mistakes. Some of it's part of a culture of operating. Some of it is whoops. Are we doing that? Let's fix it before somebody comes in and finds that we are. The Employment Development Department, in fact, issued new guidance after our first Work Investment Board report. And I really believe out of the increased transparency, the increased and new data collection, the increased scrutiny, and the unprecedented integration and coordination of various oversight entities at the state level are going to produce a really interesting record of lessons learned and a lasting list of recommendations on how state departments can change and improve how they operate their normal operations, because so much of this money is really, it's enlarged regular ongoing programs. So I'm very optimistic that even out of the mistakes, even out of things we're going to see at the end of the day we could have done differently and better, are going to be valuable lessons learned that can be handed off to the legislature and the government to make permanent improvements. Optimistic note.
Thank you very much. And I think I'm going to jump in with a couple of questions here. I agree with you that I do think that long term we're going to have better oversight of how we spend money because of the extreme effort that we have put towards oversight on the Recovery Act dollars. So I agree with you on that. But I just want to clarify for everyone else who might be listening. You said you had 17 reviews that were in process and 11 are posted. That means it is available for the public to review, correct?
Absolutely. As soon as they're final, which means, they've been vetted with the auditee. They go on my website and they get sent out to the department, the entity, the governor's office, and the legislature.
You just want to say your website address for anybody who might be
It's inspectorgeneral.ca.gov.
Great. And then you also talked about, because I think it might affect the questions that we have for our next panel, that you're going to be going in to look at weatherization in a particular program down in Southern California. Can you give us just a sense of what you're going to be following up on so that we have that information as we talk to the next panel?
Well, we're very much going to be looking at how they are supervising and overseeing their subrecipients, how they are verifying that units have actually been weatherized and the quality of the work, looking at how they ensure the eligibility of the owners or renters of the unit. And I think while we're looking, we're also going to be looking to see are there better and different ways of moving forward on this program, especially because there are other states moving forward on exactly the same kind of weatherization programs. So there's data that's being collected in other states where we can do some benchmarking, if you will.
Great, thank you. Next, we have Rick Rice, our final person on this panelist, who is the current director of the California Recovery Task Force, and he'll be updating us on the collaboration at the agency department level and executive branch oversight. Thank you, Mr. Rice.
Thank you, Chair Huber. I'd like the opportunity to give you a brief update of the task force's progress. We're required to report to the federal government each quarter, and most recently reported on March 31st. These numbers will help provide you some context in our implementation.
Can you put your mic just a little bit closer?
Okay.
I'm not sure if it's loud enough, but thank you.
Okay. As you said, over the life of the Recovery Act, California is expected to receive more than $85 billion in federal stimulus funds. Approximately $30 billion is coming in the form of federal tax benefits that will go to businesses, families, and individuals across the state. More than $55 billion is coming to our state in the form of funding for state programs, grants, and other direct assistance. Since the Recovery Act began in February 2009, through the first quarter ending March 31st, California has been awarded more than $38 billion in funding to both state and local entities. The state has been awarded more than $31 billion. Of the $31 billion that has been awarded to the state, almost $18 billion has been spent for safety net programs like unemployment insurance, Medi-Cal, and food stamps. Of the remaining $13 billion awarded to the state, more than $6 billion has been spent or paid out by the state for projects such as bridges, roads, training programs, and education. The remaining amount is working its way through the RFP process, contract agreements, and is going to be reimbursed as work is completed. On the oversight front, we cooperate fully with Inspector General Laura Chick and State Auditor Elaine Howell and the Controller's Office, because we realize everyone has a role to play in the oversight, and this makes a strong communication and teamwork all the more important. As the task force has discussed here before, shortly after it was formed, we instructed the Department of Finance's Office of State Evaluations and Audits to perform readiness reviews. This provided us with an assessment of 29 state departments and their ability to implement Recovery Act funding. As I think Inspector General Chick and State Auditor Howell will agree, it also provided a valuable auditing baseline. But the activities of Inspector General and the Bureau of State Audits also give us valuable assistance in determining how to provide important oversight to state agencies and departments. We not only use audits in conjunction with our readiness reviews to determine how to best manage the further implementation of Recovery Act funds, but we take into account the state legislative changes, federal guideline changes, and other considerations to fix problems, evaluate implementation, and ultimately make certain that we get these funds to Californians as quickly and efficiently as possible. Excuse me. There has been growing pains, and there will continue to be, but we plan to continue to perform these reviews and additional spot checks in an attempt to make certain we reduce bottlenecks and preempt any problems that may arise. Additionally, we continue to meet weekly with our task force members. We discuss issues, identify problems, and work together to make every effort to ensure the quick and efficient spending of Recovery Act funds. As part of this effort, we advise state departments and agencies on how to report on their use of the funds, which is a federal requirement. When we are notified of changes to guidance by the federal government, the task force utilizes Recovery Act bulletins, which provide instructions and guidelines to state agencies receiving stimulus funds. The task force also works hard to maintain a website that is updated each quarter with all the information on awards, projects, resources for stakeholders, and a host of other things in an effort to provide Californians a central place to find anything related to the Recovery Act in California. And if I could plug it, it's recovery.ca.gov. I'd like to thank you again for the opportunity to be here. I'd like to reassure you that we will continue to work with all state departments to ensure funds are deployed strategically and in a manner consistent with state and federal requirements. We also appreciate the valuable work done by Inspector General Chick, State Auditor Howell. We will continue to work with them as well as with the federal auditing and oversight entities, which include inspectors general from each federal agency, the Government Accountability Office, the Office of Management and Budget, and also the Vice President's Office. Thank you.
Thank you. Since we've had multiple different heads of the task force, some of this information we did already know, But one of the things I wanted to make sure that you knew is the readiness reviews. There's some question about whether or not those readiness reviews were really vigorous enough to make us prepared for all of the federal stimulus money coming our way, which is part of the reason why we did our proactive audit to look for those internal controls ourselves to make sure that that everything really was ready to go, instead of just taking the executive branch's word for it. And I think that we found some problems along the way. I recognize that some of those things are because guidance was late from the federal government, and some of it is just because it required a different way of doing things that people weren't really ready to do. But I hope that the task force is also looking at the auditor's recommendations, because some of those recommendations, while we may have only found it in one particular program, apply equally to other parts of the executive branch that we maybe haven't looked at yet. So I hope that as you get comfortable in this new role, that you're looking at those things as well.
Thank you. We will. We have, I think, a very good working relationship with both entities here, as well as GAO and the federal entities.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we're moving right along because we do want to this is more of a status update since we did a much more detailed oversight hearing back in January. So I do want to ask I want to ask the state auditor to stay here as we ask the first program who's coming up for a kind of update to join us up here. And that's Karen Douglas, the chair of the California Energy Commission, and any staff that I know she has brought with her. And I'm going to ask the state auditor to give us a little update of the 6-month review of where things stand as we look at how things are going. We had a lot of issues that were flagged in the January hearing about things that might be slow to get the money out, some things that were going to be competitive versus things that were going to be block grant. And so we can get a little bit of an overview of that again from Ms. Douglas. But first, let's start with the state auditor and the update on this portion of our audit returns. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I'm hope that you have the handouts that we brought to the committee hearing, we have a handout that talks about the 3 audits that we did. The first page of the handout is just basically the audit highlights. So we issued the audit report in December of 2009. It's on the state energy program. This is a program for which California received a very, very significant award from the federal government, $226 million for the state energy program. Traditionally, the Energy Commission manages this program, but on a much, much smaller scale. So certainly this was challenging for the administration and the commission. When we issued the report in December, we had some concerns that they had not made much progress in implementing their sub-programs. And none of the Recovery Act monies had been issued yet and really been providing benefit to California. But they had awarded a couple of contracts for $40 million, one to DGS and one to EDD. The other concern we had was their system of internal controls was not adequate, in our opinion, to ensure that the funds were going to be used appropriately. So we made a variety of recommendations. So if you look at page 2 of the handout, you'll see a grid. It should look like this. You're probably looking at my written testimony, but there's an attachment. The second page, so what the first column will show you is the initial recommendations that we made to the Energy Commission in the December report. The blue column in the middle is the 6-month response. So as I'm sure you're aware, whenever we issue an audit report, an entity has to report back to us at intervals after the report goes public, 60 days, 6 months, and 1 year. This represents their 60-day response that they provided to us. And then the right-hand column, which says results of follow-up work, this is work that we've done just in the last couple of weeks to verify some of the assertions or to get some more information related to the assertions that the agency, that the Commission reported in their 6-month response. So the first recommendation, as you can see, is about internal controls. We had concerns. Their response at the time we issued the report is that they intended to bring in some expertise to assist them, and they in fact have done that. They've awarded a contract to Perry Smith, a local firm, and they they have awarded that contract. It's my understanding that contract has been executed. It's a 2-year contract. And what we were pleased to see in that contract are very specific tasks, very specific expectations as far as deliverables, and specific deadlines. So the Energy Commission will be able to hold Perry Smith accountable and have expected results relatively soon. What the contract indicates is that they should have some assessment of their internal controls and some suggested recommendations for change as early as the end of this month, with the final report being completed in August. I mean, I think the Commission really needs to pay attention to the June work, so if they can begin strengthening controls, they need to do that as quickly as possible. So we were pleased to see that they were able to award that contract, and the specific tasks identified in the contract are good. Having deadlines in that contract is very good. Another contract that they've awarded is for monitoring, evaluation, and reporting. And this is something that we again suggested that they needed to strengthen their ability to monitor the subrecipients. Something the Inspector General, Laura Chick, was talking about is a lot of agencies do not have the capacity to do that subrecipient monitoring. So what the Energy Commission decided to do is contract out and bring some of that expertise to the Commission. And we were happy to see that. Again, this contract did have some very specific tasks identified in it, so that's a positive. The concern we have in reviewing the contract is, unlike the Perry Smith contract for the internal control work, we didn't see specific timelines or milestones for which the Commission would be expecting reports back from this particular contractor. So we would advise the Commission as they move forward with task orders, et cetera, for that particular contract to make sure that it's clear to the contractor what the expectation is, not only the task itself, but the timing of when the Commission would like some of those results to be provided. So those were the two key things that the Commission needed to do relative to assessing internal controls and strengthening their ability to provide some oversight over these programs. The next recommendation is related to the actual sub-programs that the Commission intended to administer through the state energy program. The first program, there's 5 that we identify, and what we were suggesting here, again, we were feeling back in December things weren't moving as quickly as perhaps we felt needed to happen. The intent of the Recovery Act is to stimulate the economy, get this money out into the communities, et cetera. So the first program is an energy efficient state property program. This is one of the 2 contracts that we identified in the December report that the Commission had awarded. It awarded it to Department of General Services. The purpose of it would be to provide energy efficiency, retrofitting, et cetera, in state buildings. The follow-up work we identified is, even though that $25 million contract had been awarded last fall, what we found from General Services when we went out there is they have $5.5 million identified for about 8 projects. A few of those projects are underway, but there have not been many expenditures. So even though the $25 million was awarded last October or November, we only saw evidence of one invoice, $67,000 invoice. There is indication that there will be more invoices coming in. But again, the reason that concerns us is how quickly is some of this work happening? How quickly are some of these projects at these state departments being implemented to, infuse money into the economy? So we had some concerns relative to that particular program. The next program is 1% energy efficiency. This is to provide loans to existing residential and commercial buildings. In this particular instance, we did see that they had approved 24 loans, essentially comprising the amount of this particular sub-program, $25 million. So that's good news. These agreements have recently been executed from March 2010 to as recently as last month. So there has not been any funding dispersed yet, but the loans are in place, so we should be seeing some progress over the course of the next several months. There are approximately 3 loans that they intend to approve based on the information they provided to us within the next 2 to 3 weeks, hopefully by the end of this month. So that program seems to be moving along. Again, a little slow, but at least we've got those loans approved and I executed some contracts. The workforce training program, the third one on the next page, on page 3, this is where they provided funding to Employment Development Department. and it was a $15 million contract. This one, there has actually been some progress made, and when we went out and did some follow-up, EDD actually had trained more individuals than they had projected they would be able to train. So their goal is to train about 4,800 individuals, and when we went out and looked, as of March 31st, their goal was right around 1,000. We were able to verify that they've trained a little over 1,000, 1,007. So there's good evidence of what their expectations were from the various grantees, how many individuals they expected to train, evidence of these individuals receiving training. So we feel that the EDD piece is really moving along, and there's good accountability for what's happening with that money and the individuals who are being trained. Employment Training Panel received some funding as well. They indicated that ETP was going to award grants to 14 entities. We saw a list of 14 proposals. 12 of those have been approved. So similar to the EDD, there has been some progress. Unlike the EDD evidence, we didn't see any evidence of any individuals receiving training yet. They certainly have an indication of the different programs, the entities, the 14 entities, and how many they expect to train, but we didn't see any evidence of any of that training happening yet. So that one's not quite as far along as the EDD contract and that particular program. The Clean Energy Business Financing Program, a $30 million program. This is a program that the Energy Commission indicated to us back in December they were going to work with business, transportation, and housing. This is a program that provides low-interest loans to eligible applicants. What Energy Commission has been able to do in the last few months is actually enter into an interagency agreement with BT&H. BT&H intends to use some financial development corporations, solicit applications, score those, evaluate those applications, and then make decisions. And I think the Commission will be involved in some of the decision making as to who those individuals will be that will receive those types of loans. As I indicated, the interagency with BT&H was executed, as we indicate in the response here, just in the last couple of months. So there haven't been any loans made yet. I think they're still in the process of soliciting applications, so therefore no funds have been loaned. The projection, based on the follow-up work that we did, is that some of these projects will get underway hopefully either this month or in July. But again, we hadn't seen a lot of applications through BT&H yet, so we think that might not be as far along as anticipated. The last program is the largest program, the Energy Efficiency Program. It's a $110 million program. There are a variety of elements within that: municipal financing, municipal and commercial, building retrofit program, and residential program. And what we saw here is there is a list of proposals. Some of those have been approved. The concern is we don't see any executed agreements yet. So the Commission has approved some of these programs and said, yes, we want to award funding to this particular entity, but we still have the extra step of actually executing that agreement so that those programs can be carried out. So again, there isn't any funding that's been dispersed yet because we don't even have an executed agreement. So a similar situation where we would encourage the Commission to move as quickly as possible. I understand in one instance there is some litigation. I don't have specifics on that. I would defer to the Commission, but I know that's been, for at least one of these programs, been a little bit of a sticking point or a difficulty for the Commission, kind of out of their control. There's been litigation, so that's the reason why one of those three sub-programs has been a little bit slow to get off the ground. The contract I was talking about earlier, and then I'll close my comments, the monitoring, verification, and evaluation contract that they executed at the end of April, it's our understanding that that contractor will be responsible for monitoring all of these programs as they are executed and as the funding begins to flow and these entities implement these various programs. So again, hearkening back to my earlier comments, I would really encourage the Commission to make sure that they're aware of what they expect this contractor to do, and very specific timelines as to when they expect some feedback from the contractor, so that if there are concerns with any of these entities administering these programs, the Commission can make sure that corrective action is taken very promptly. So that pretty much in a fairly quick summary of the issues that we identified, the Commission's response, and the follow-up work that we've done in the last couple of weeks.
Great, thank you. And you really did cover a lot of the highlights from the graph. So for anybody following along, having the graph from the State Auditor's Office is probably helpful in knowing what a lot of this oversight is. But I did want to kind of highlight one issue before I turn to the Commission. And, one of the things I want to make sure that we're doing is holding them accountable for the things that it's reasonable for us to hold them accountable to, and the stuff that's outside their control, like not having guidelines to be able to do it, that we're really not attacking them for those things. So one of the comments you made was on the 1% energy efficiency loans. I think that's actually a positive that we actually know who all the loans are going to, so it's encumbered in that sense. And you did still make comments about that being too slow, but the way that program is set up is on a reimbursement basis. Right. So if the actual folks aren't doing the work, the slow would really be from the people who are doing the work that need to get reimbursed from the program, as opposed to the Commission being slow. Would you agree with that?
Well, I would agree with that. Our concern and my comment with regard to slow implementation is these loans, as recently as last month, and you see the beginning in our follow-up column, the Commission executed the majority of these agreements between March and May. So we were talking about this particular program back in December with them, and I know they were working on guidelines, et cetera, but it's now June, and that was my perspective, because you're absolutely right. It's a reimbursement program, so now that these have been executed, it's up to those particular entities to now, implement the energy efficiency improvements that they intend to make in these residential and commercial buildings, and then bill the Commission for the reimbursement. So I would agree.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't kind of holding them accountable for enforcing a timeline that wasn't within their control, but was really based on reimbursement. So thank you for that clarification. And now I'm sure that gave you lots of stuff to comment on. But next we have the chairwoman for the Energy Commission, Karen Douglas, to provide the committee with an update and kind of respond to some of the concerns addressed that the state auditor just highlighted. Thanks.
Thank you, Chairwoman Huber, Senator Padilla. I welcome the opportunity to be here today and provide the status report on the Energy Commission's ARA implementation. We provided packets to the committee, so I believe that you'll have them, and I'm going to be fairly brief as I go through the materials. We have the first couple pages, page 2, goals and objectives, which I know you've seen before, and page 3 is an overview summary page of all of the programs and where the funding has gone. So I'd actually, do we have an extra one I could pass to Ms. Howell?
Oh, absolutely. Thanks.
You're welcome. It's easier for you to be able to follow along too. I'd really like to start presenting more detail on page 4 of my PowerPoint, which covers our response to BSA recommendation number 1 to strengthen our systems of internal controls to ensure that we can meet the requirements of the Recovery Act. This page in the PowerPoint goes with a chart that you have on the left-hand side of your packets when they're open. And this is a flow chart showing the 2 and actually 3 contracts that are relevant to this, although the PowerPoint talks about 2 contracts. The flow chart, I asked staff to ensure that this graph covers all 3. On the far left is a Cambria Solutions contract that we actually entered into with our own funding in order to do the basic prep work for the auditing and MV&E that we knew was coming. The Cambria contract focused on reporting, and it focused on ensuring that the recipients of Energy Commission funding would be able to meet federal reporting requirements. There are 2 reporting systems that are separate, both of which must be complied with, one from the Department of Energy and the other from OMB. The protocols and the manual that we developed through the Cambria contract incorporate both of those requirements, plus some additional information that our MV&E contractor, when they came on board, decided that they needed. It's been helpful, among other things. We have trained our staff to train recipients in how to carry out reporting of data. So this is the foundation on which the MV&E work in particular is based. The second contract that I'll address is Perry Smith, and I think what's helpful about this chart is it shows not only some of the major work areas, but also the timeline for when these would occur. So initially, they'll be helping us with a risk assessment and audit guide and an audit plan, help us develop monitoring process and procedures, train staff, and you can see some of the other tasks. As time goes on and we get to the point where projects have been completed, that's when they go into the post-completion auditing work, report out, and so on. So this is a summary of the auditing contract, the Perry Smith contract. The third contract that I'd like to discuss is the KEMA contract, which is for measurement, verification, and evaluation. Again, KEMA, one of their first tasks was to review the work that Cambria Solutions had done and ensure that the fields that we had provided that covered Department of Energy's needs, OMB's needs, and our needs were complete. They added just a few items. And just to give you a sense of what's involved in the reporting, if you look at the attached pages to this chart, this is a list of all of the fields that we require reporting on. So there are 4 pages of some of these you fill in once and you're done. Some of these need to be regularly updated. So this will give you a sense of what the reporting actually looks like. On the KEMA contract, there was a concern that arose about whether they would be in a position of doing MV&E on projects that they were also involved in implementing. We required them to pull out of implementing any contracts that would be covered by the MV&E work. So what they will be doing is MV&E on all of the work that's funded by by the Energy Commission administered ARA dollars, and they will not be on the implementing side of any of that. I will move on, although we can come back to this if you have questions later, to BSA recommendation number 2 and page 5 in the PowerPoint. We have executed, well, this page has a general acknowledgement that we completely support the BSA's recommendation that we move forward as quickly as possible. At this point, we have encumbered about 87% of the SEP funds and virtually all of the other funds except for a $3.3 million small fund that has the longest deadline for expending the money. The remaining 13% of SEP funds that have not been encumbered consists of the Clean Energy Manufacturing Program, and I'll say a few words about why that's taking a bit longer so you get a sense of the process. We've already executed over 250 contracts, and I think when you get to the question of why it takes so long, there's a certain number of contract staff and attorneys and legal review, and you've got to go through DGS, and we found this to be the process where we've had to require staff to work long hours, and a number of them, many of them as needed, have been working furlough days, and they've been really cranking out this work under very high expectations for quality and for ultimate performance. So it's been, I think, a challenge to scale up to administering this amount of additional funding with these levels of additional requirements. I think staff has done a tremendous job in rising to the occasion, although I will also agree that I wish all of the money was out the door and done with. And so the day that happens, I think I will be one of the happiest people in Sacramento. Page 6 talks about the status of the SEP programs in a little more detail. I won't elaborate on this too much except to say that 3 of these 5 programs are revolving funds, which is great because they will continue to provide benefits. A number of these programs provide foundational work for AB 758 implementation, which is statewide energy efficiency retrofit, And for Homestar, if Homestar passes, these programs will position California to do particularly well, we believe, in bringing Homestar funding to California. As you may recall, AB 758 identified ARA funding as the initial funding source for 758 implementation. $3.3 million of ARA money is going into that, and that covers, and that's going through the budget process. I'll mention on the ECA program, which is the third bullet down, putting Recovery Act funding in the ECA program not only led to the Recovery Act funding being fully subscribed, and that's the 1% loans, but it also led to all of the money that we had in the account at 3% interest rates being fully subscribed as well. So since September 2009, we have, in addition to the 1% loans, we have encumbered about 26.8, nearly $27 million in 3% loans. And at this point, that program has been loaned out. We have some 12 million of applications in that would like to be funded if and when we get the funding to do that. Clean energy business financing is, we've closed the loan solicitation, as you'll see here. We put $30.6 million into that. Some of that goes into administrative costs. That doesn't all go into loans. We got over 40 applications for over $100 million, and these are loans. These are for low-interest loans that will come into a fund and revolve to the benefit of California. A quick word on status. The process is that the Energy Commission scores awards based on policy criteria. They then go to is this too much detail? No. I'm sorry. They then go to 4 financial development corporations for a financial review. We hope to issue a NOPA, Notice of Proposed Awards, in mid to late June after the financial review is completed. However, with all of this money, it's not enough to comply with CEQA projects before awards can be, in some cases, encumbered. In other cases, contracts executed have to comply with NEPA and SHPO. We've reached an agreement with SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Officer, which allows us to encumber funds by approving contracts conditional on later SHPO compliance. And of course, the SHPO compliance is occurring concurrently and very quickly. On NEPA, we really have to wait until the NEPA documents are in. So there will be a period between NOPA going out and ultimately knowing whether everything on the list complies. The next page summarizes the block grants. I think I'll just speak to broad policy on this one. Under Department of Energy rules, 60% had to go to small cities and counties. 40% of the overall funding was discretionary, and we had more discretion on how to spend it. We allocated the money to small cities and counties on a per capita basis, but we provided a little bit extra. We provided minimum levels of funding for the smallest cities and counties, and we provided additional funding for those with extra high unemployment. So 70% of the funding ended up going through this direct per capita allocation. With the 30% that remained, we are in the process of executing or of approving direct agreements with the city of Fresno, which for a program covering Fresno County and Kern County, with Los Angeles County and San Diego County for residential building energy retrofit programs. The reason for that is that the competitive grants, while they brought us great programs and they brought us great leverage and we're really pleased with them, did not give us statewide coverage. And in particular, we really wanted to make sure that some of these large metropolitan areas had cutting-edge, state-of-the-art energy efficiency retrofit programs so that we can meet statewide policy goals. I have a page on the rebate program. If you have questions, please let me know. I'll note that there is $24 million remaining, so if any of you would like to buy a refrigerator, a washing machine, or a wall air conditioner, you still have time. And finally, the 2010 IPER update, which we're working on this year, and we have workshops coming up very soon, is going to focus on results of and policy implications of ARA implementation from the Energy Commission. And so we'll be looking at, as you see, measurement verification and evaluation. DOE is sending a high-level representative to talk about their expectations and what they see going forward. We'll bring in the PUC and some other agencies. We really want to make sure that we capitalize on this opportunity to improve our systems and to ensure that the sometimes different MV&E systems and approaches talk to each other, can be rationalized and make sense. So that we'll look at that. We'll look at the local government ARA awards. That includes block grant and ECA for the most part. We'll also, in that, try to look at what some other states are doing. We'll look at how we've worked to leverage and bring additional money into California through funding programs such as PEER and AB 118. We'll look at clean jobs, workforce development, manufacturing, and regional partnerships, which is very much focused on how this is advancing 758 implementation. Finally, before I conclude and ask for questions, I'd like to acknowledge that the U.S. General Accountability Office is actually in the audience today to observe the proceeding. They've been meeting with a number of state entities, including the Energy Commission in Sacramento, to obtain a status of the ARA rollout. And they cycle through all states that are receiving ARA funds, and this is their 5th or 6th visit to California. So I think I'm pleased that the timing worked out and they were able to be here today. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm assuming there will be some other questions, but I just wanted to reiterate for you the same thing I think I said at our January oversight hearing that I've said to you personally, but want to make sure that I'm on record as saying if there's anything in the rollout of these funds that is a state-created stumbling block that makes it more difficult for you to act as quickly as you need to act or to get the money out before the deadline, please let this committee know. And either, there's plenty of avenues for solving those problems with the legislature, either through the policy committee chairs and utilities or through this Joint Legislative Audit Committee, which is aware more of the rollout related to ARA funds. And if there's anything that we can do to make a legislative solution for anything that's making it difficult to get this money out as quick as possible, please let us know. I didn't hear anything in your remarks that suggest that there's anything yet that we need to be working on. I know that there is a pending lawsuit on one program, and we'll continue to talk about that. But if there's anything that's making it more difficult for you, please let us know.
I really appreciate that, and I will take you up on it because we can't. The first thing we learned is that we can't do this alone, and we have benefited tremendously from help from the legislature, from the governor's office, from other agencies, from our correspondence with BSA and Inspector General Chick. So I will absolutely do that. I'll draw your attention to one legislative item that is proceeding well, but that is important to us, and that is that in order for us to be able to revolve the clean energy manufacturing funding, there has to be an account created in state law that allows it to revolve. Otherwise, it would revert to the federal government. So there's some language, I believe, as a budget trailer bill. I'm not certain, but there's some language that addresses that. That's important, and that's in progress. If there's anything else, we will definitely bring that to your attention.
Senator Padilla.
One follow-up to this item and then a couple other questions. Is there that state account language time sensitive? Because God only knows when we're going to have a budget this year.
I'm going to ask staff to speak to that.
This man knows that.
Thank you. Mark Hutchison with the Energy Commission. In terms of time sensitivity, we want to be able to recapture loan repays after a project has completed. We think that, although we haven't selected our projects yet, some of them could actually have a pretty quick completion and actually begin paying back within a year. So we'd certainly like to see something happen as part of the
Be more
budget.
specific. Do you need it done by June 30th?
No.
You need it done by October 1st?
I would say before the end of the calendar year
Mark,
Definitely.
wouldn't it be true to say that we need it done before repayments start coming in?
Exactly, yeah. And it's hard to gauge when those are, but in talking with staff, there are some quick strike projects that could begin repaying back. But if we could have something before, November, December, I think we're okay.
Okay. Well, I would certainly hope we have a budget by then, but if it's not looking good when that time comes towards the end of session, we should just search for a vehicle with similar content, or at least maybe same section of the code that we need or what have you. And I got to believe that's something we can get done on a bipartisan basis and a quick basis.
We would really appreciate your help with that. And I'll mention one other related legislative item before hearing the rest of your questions, and that is that the ECA program, which has had just tremendous success and really shined through ARA implementation, is up for reauthorization. And there was a policy bill addressing that has stalled, and so we're looking at how to move reauthorization of that program. But that's not directly related to enabling us to comply with our ARA responsibilities.
Do you have a bill number?
It was AB 40.
Yeah, it was AB 46.
But now there will have to be a new one.
Okay. So the other question, sort of along the lines of what the chair was asking, if there's any impediments that you've seen that we can help knock down to help facilitate the money going out the door. We want to hear it. We didn't hear any in your presentation, so I'll assume that's inclusive of what is on my mind. The questions that we've raised through policy committee about the amount of monies either staying in state or being awarded to contractors outside the state of California doesn't seem to have created too long of a delay, if any, in you meeting your deadlines and obligations. But you also didn't raise in your presentation questions or issues of maybe some of the conflict of interest policies that we've discussed in policy committee, some of the entities that are receiving grants either for the work and or the actual measurement and verification and evaluation. They're not dollars and cents questions in terms of a fiscal audit, but to the extent that they could impact policy questions that could then cause delays and then end up being subject of an audit because it impacts whether the money's moving on a timely basis or not. Can you just share some of those issues and what we're doing about it?
I'll speak to, I heard two issues specifically that I'll address, and then if I miss something, let me know what to go back to. One of the benefits, really, of going through this process and some of the questions that you asked us about what the adequacy of our internal policies and procedures to ensure that we had the best possible scoring process, and that we really go back and review our conflict of interest policy, our incompatible activity statement, our compliance not only with the letter of the government code and now I'm going to even forget the acronym that everybody here knows what we're talking about. We've done a fairly extensive review, as we discussed. Our assistant chief counsel, who's in charge of our conflict review and ethics reviews, is here, and she's able to speak in more detail to what we've done. But I'll say generally, and then I'll offer her up if you'd like to hear more specifics, that I think that this will benefit us in that we will put policies and processes into place to ensure that we catch and vet ahead of time any possible issue, whether it may be appearance or maybe an actual potential violation of the code.
No, and I'm not suggesting that we kind of replay the various committee hearings that we've had here today. I guess to simplify the questions, one is all those conversations we had about money being awarded out of state versus in state. How much was sort of too top-heavy, in my single opinion, about overhead versus actual work on the ground. Questions of, is the money flowing to areas that are harder hit economically vis-a-vis unemployment or anything else? We've worked through a lot of those issues through the policy committee. That doesn't seem to have caused you any undue delay or served as any sort of obstacle in moving the money out the door on a timely basis.
It has.
Is that correct?
The extent to which it did affect us is that we spent a fair amount of time working on it, but we did not hold up grants or development of contracts. We certainly didn't miss any deadlines. We pushed contracts forward while we were in discussions with you so that we would be in a position to act on them, as you know, and as we discussed, so that we would not be slowed down. The only extent to which it slowed us down at all is that some key staff who we needed to work on responding to questions and so on were the same key staff negotiating agreements, and that's just always how it will be. But it certainly didn't put us anywhere near missing any deadlines.
But we didn't miss any deadlines. That's the bottom line, really.
Absolutely. We did not miss any deadlines, and as we've said before, we aim to beat deadlines, not meet them.
And there's still some sort of follow-up on some of the other issues that we'll have in policy committee. But let me just share with this committee that I'm happy to see the movement that we've had since the January hearing of JLAC, not just on money's out the door. It's not completely done, but I think we've come a long way. But in the process, having addressed some of these policy questions like maximizing the use of Recovery Act dollars, distinct from all other sources of funding for some of these programs, energy efficiency otherwise, for economic and job impact to the good in states. In the process, also having realized a need to revisit existing conflict of interest policies and procedures within the Energy Commission. I think that, too, is moving in a good direction as well. So I wanted to acknowledge that here in front of this committee. And I think that's all I have for right now.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Assemblymember Monning, for joining us. Just to wrap this up, I think that what we're still looking at is making sure that all the money really is encumbered before the deadline, and that the money's getting out as quick as possible. Hearing now of more of the policy committee concerns that may have been influencing the process a little bit, I understand why sometimes it's slow, but recognizing that the reality on the ground is we need this money out as soon as possible. And so we're going to continue to ask those questions. I just want to compliment you on working with the legislature and working with the auditor's office to make sure that everybody has access to that information. I think there's still some concerns about the oversight contracting and making sure that there's real deadlines for getting that information. But you hear those from the auditor as well as from this committee. So I think that we'll be following up with you again. But please, if anything comes up, as we get closer and closer to these deadlines, we're going to be more and more concerned that money is at risk of being lost if we don't get it out. So please let us know if anything happens that slows anything else down beyond what we have already flagged.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. We'll definitely take it to heart, and I will ask staff to work with BSA to satisfy them in terms of their questions about the MB&E contract.
The last thing we want to hear is it's a year later, and now it's the I told you so, right?
No.
Okay.
That's right.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Next on our agenda, we have, it is Cliff next, right? Okay. Cliff Allenby, Director of the Department of Community Services and Development, and he will be discussing the Audit 2009-119.2, for those of you following along, and the $886 million in ARA funding for the weatherization program. Last time we reviewed the weatherization program, the auditor's office had serious concerns about actual weatherizations being completed during I guess this wasn't the January hearing. This was during a subsequent follow-up meeting that I had. We found out that there were some additional weatherizations happening. So we're now doing that follow-up here so that we can make sure that everyone is up to date on the auditor's current status and on the weatherization's current program. So if I could have the auditor briefly talk about where we are on the status, and then we will go to Mr. Allenby.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the handout, again, it starts on page 4. This is an audit we did at the Department of Community Services and Development And we issued the report in February of this year. And this program, weatherization program, is a program to improve energy efficiency for low-income families, installing weatherization materials, attic insulation, caulking, weather stripping, furnace replacements, those types of things. When we issued the report in February, the first issue we had was there were certainly delays in this program getting off the ground. In fact, as of December of 2009, there hadn't been any homes weatherized. But much of that delay was shared by the state of California, but certainly the federal government. One of the issues was Davis-Bacon requirements and the guidance coming out from the federal government as to how states should implement those Davis-Bacon requirements and what they specifically would be and what the prevailing wages would be. So there was delay, not at the fault of the state of California. I think that caused delay of the weatherization programs across the country. But we had some other issues with regard to CSD and their estimates of how many homes they would be able to weatherize. As I'm sure you're aware, there are some deadlines or goals that have to be met by September of this year, by September 30th. The goal nationally and the state of California is hoping to achieve the goal of weatherizing 30% of the homes they've identified in the state plan. The reason that's a key performance measure is the state currently has access to half of the money that was awarded to California. California received a $186 million award. We had access to $93 million. We have to meet those performance goals and achieve some other monitoring responsibilities, quality assurance, to be able to gain access to the other $93 million. And the goal is to have those milestones met by September 30th. So we had some concerns with that. So if you flip over to page 5, pages 5, actually I have 3 pages here, 5, 6, and 7, talk a little bit about some of the recommendations that we had. As I indicated, the first column talks about the recommendations we made in the initial report published in February. Certainly one of the concerns we had was with the state plan. We suggested that CSD modify their state plan because they indicated that they were going to reduce the overall number of homes that they would weatherize throughout this program. So they, in fact, did amend their plan, reducing the number, which has an impact on the number they have to, or hopefully, weatherize by September of this year. In their response to us, which again is the middle column, as of the first quarter of 2010, they reported that they had weatherized 2,934 dwellings through their service providers. This was short of their goal, and it was about 75% of their production goal. So there's concern there that there needs to be some ramping up, some more production happening over the next couple of quarters to be able to accomplish the goal of weatherizing approximately 13,000 homes by September. To the credit of the administration, the governor's office, when we issued this report, asked the Department of Energy to come in and do its own assessment and look at some of the concerns that we raised. And actually, the U.S. Department of Energy gave the governor's office and CSD some recommendations similar to what we suggested, but also raised some concerns also about whether or not we're going to be able to meet these goals. So one of the things that we identified in our report is that they had not executed a lot of contracts, didn't have a lot of service providers on board. Again, part of that's because of the Davis-Bacon requirements. Some providers said, I don't want to have to comply with all the Recovery Act requirements. So the state really had to work with some of the providers. What they were able to do is award more contracts. As you can see towards the bottom of page 5 on the right-hand column, as of May 27th, they had actually executed 36 contracts with 36 service providers. That is an improvement because now these service providers can continue to weatherize homes and hopefully production numbers will increase. There are some service areas, however, that are still not covered. This was an issue we raised in the report when we issued it in February. There were key areas in California, the Bay Area, San Francisco, certain regions of Los Angeles that were not covered yet by service providers. As you can see in our comments on the right-hand column, they're still hoping to contract with some service providers to cover Alameda, San Francisco regions in LA and El Dorado County. Actually, they were intending to have a service provider available middle of April. That didn't happen, so now their goal is June. So that's really key for the department to accomplish. In the Department of Energy's report, when they were looking at the service providers who had not yet been signed up, those service providers represented about 20% of expected production. So it's going to be very important for the department to continue to pursue more contracts with more service providers so production can increase. The good news is they executed a contract with a provider called Maravilla. This is a provider that in the past had some issues, both fiscal and accountability issues, but the Department of Energy took a look at Maravilla, gave the state the go-ahead to contract with them with the cautionary measure of making sure that you do monitor this service provider, both from a fiscal perspective and accountability perspective. So having that provider on board is good news, but again, the state needs to make sure we do a good job of monitoring that particular provider. In the middle of this page, I skipped over, there are weatherization measures that the state needs to have approved by the U.S. Department of Energy. Again, this is really important because as these measures are approved, the providers can do more work in individual dwellings. Right now, they're somewhat limited because those measures have not been approved. So again, we recommended, as did the Department of Energy, you've got to get those measures, the proposed measures, submitted to U.S. DOE so that they can approve them very, very quickly. So
can I just jump in real quick because I have a question on that? If those are approved and they can do more work in individual residences, will that bring down the number of homes that need to be weatherized?
That's exactly the point, and that's what the Department of Energy talked about, because right now the average they're spending is about $2,300 per home, which if you divide that into the $186 million, that was exactly the point the U.S. Department of Energy made, is your numbers are going to be higher. But if you get these measures approved, then you can do a broader base weatherization in the individual dwellings, which will bring the price up, which will drop the number of homes to expend the full $186 million. So exactly right. So it's very important that CSD get these protocols. They intend to have them, they had hoped to have them by April 30th. Now their expectation is to have the protocols by June 15th, get those submitted to U.S. Department of Energy as quickly as possible. And Energy has asserted that they will, expedite and try to get those measures approved as soon as possible. So those are very, very key things that need to happen. On page 6, we talk about subrecipient monitoring. One of the things that has to be included in some of the planning and monitoring, again, for the milestone by September 30th, is a certain amount of quality assurance needs to be happening. 5% of the homes that have been weatherized, they have to be reviewed to make sure that the quality of the work that's being done is up to standard. And some of the concerns that were raised is, number one, we don't have a quality assurance plan in place yet, but the expectation is, the assertion that the Community Services Department indicates, is they were going to contract with an entity called Richard Heath Associates. The concern here is kind of similar to what we were just talking about with the Energy Commission, is Richard Heath Associates has been brought on board to provide technical assistance and training to service providers. So now if they're going to be conducting quality assurance, you have a conflict of interest problem there. This was not something that came up during the course of our audit. Our concern was they hadn't a process in place. This came up when U.S. Department of Energy came out and took a look and said, no, you cannot have the entity that's training and providing technical assistance doing the QA. So the U.S. Department of Energy said, you've got to get this resolved by July 1st. So the department has asserted that they have contacted Department of General Services. It's my understanding they are looking at Housing and Community Development to see if there are other state entities that could provide this type of quality assurance work. But again, time is of the essence, because the U.S. Department of Energy really encouraged this to be resolved by July 1st. And the reason is we've got to have some quality assurance work done to meet the milestones, these September 30th milestone. Everyone focuses on the 30% of homes being weatherized, but there are other requirements to be able to gain access to that second half of the funding, the $93 million. So we've got to get the quality assurance in place as quickly as possible, particularly as they ramp up and continue to weatherize more and more homes each month. We've got to have that oversight process in place. Back to the top of the page, again, talking a little bit about monitoring. CSD is planning to conduct site visits 34 site visits by September 30th. They have developed a ranking system of their service providers, and one of the things that we saw is they have a system where they can identify those providers that are not meeting their monthly goals. They're either 20% short, 30% short, in some cases 50% short of their goals, and they're highlighting those providers to prioritize some of their site visits, require those providers to provide or to submit a corrective action plan to the state about what are you going to do to get your production numbers up. So we think that's a good ranking system that they've put together. But again, they really need to continue to focus and work with these providers. One of the things that the U.S. Department of Energy suggested that I think the department is considering is to be able to modify some of their contracts and amend contracts. So if they have a service provider that's exceeding its goals and doing a good job, and we have other providers that are perhaps not doing as well, they can shift some of the funding over to the successful or the more productive providers so that the state would be able to meet its goals. So that's something that they're taking a look at as far as whether or not that is something that the state's going to consider doing. But they certainly have now established a process to really monitor the providers as to whether or not they're meeting their goals of the number of units they are weatherizing. The last issue that we talk about on this page in our recommendations was related to cash advances. There were some concerns in our report that we raised about how they were advancing funds and whether or not that was in compliance with federal requirements, and we had an issue with that. We suggested that the department clarify and ensure that they have the authority to do that. They have sought assistance from the U.S. Department of Energy. U.S. DOE agreed with our conclusion that their current policy is not appropriate, so they do need to make some modifications to that. So we would expect some progress with that over the course of the next month or so. So really kind of the key thing here is they have brought more service providers on board, but what we have seen thus far is they have not met their goal, certainly their first quarter goal of 2010, as far as the number of homes they intended to weatherize. There is a goal of weatherizing 30% of the homes by September 30th of this year, a responsibility to have quality assurance in place. So there's much that needs to happen in a very short period of time. So we really need to continue to pay attention to this particular program and continue to receive feedback from Community Services and Development so that we're able to access that additional $93 million that's available to the state for weatherization. The paragraph at the bottom of page 6, we wanted to try and give a little bit of perspective as far as how is California doing with respect to other states. And GAO, again, issued a report, one of their reports that they issue every few months because they have teams in various states, as you heard earlier. And they issued their most recent report in May of 2010 and did speak about the weatherization program and found that there were some states that had already met their 30% goals, states that have fairly small number of homes that they're going to weatherize, but there were other states that were lagging, similar to California, that had only weatherized 7, 8, and 9% of their homes. So we wanted to provide a little bit of perspective here. My final comment is in reviewing the report that the U.S. Department of Energy put out recently, and again, that's the report they put together at the request of the governor's office to have Energy come in. Energy raised concerns about California not being able to really bring the weatherization program up to, I can't think of the right word, but they were saying that other states have been able to get over some of the hurdles of Davis-Bacon and some of the implementation issues that most all states faced early in this program, but California seemed to be continuing to lag, so they had some concerns. Again, they made several recommendations similar to the ones that we made and ones that I identified in my testimony today. So again, this program, I think we really need to continue to focus on it and provide as much oversight as possible. With that, I'll allow the department to provide their comments.
Thank you. And I know you're going to have some updates for us on homes that have actually been weatherized, I'm hoping. But I just want to, before you speak, I want to say that this last point that the auditor hit on was one of the things that I had pulled out too, kind of where California is in relation to other states on implementing it. Because when the report first came out, that was one of the things that we were looking at was, is California just experiencing the same problems that everybody else is, or have other people found a way around this? And when I look at states like Florida and New York able to meet targets, that's where I think California should be in the same league with at least states that are of comparable size and have some of similar challenges that we have. So if you could address those issues too in your presentation, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Cliff Allenby, Director of CSD, and I have with me Jason Wimbley, who is responsible for the ARA program. Let me start at the end. On the cash advance issue, we are working with Department of Energy on that issue. We're also working internally that if we could change and speed up some of our procedures, instead of doing it monthly, doing it more often than that, because the issue is we want to get the money turned around and out the door, because we don't want our providers to use no money as the excuse not to provide weatherization. As the auditor pointed out, we are lagging right now in terms of the number of homes based on what our estimates were. We are ramping up. We are bringing on more providers. As she pointed out, that we have, you didn't do any better than I'm going to do, Maravilla on, and that's a major source, and we believe they'll do a good job, and we are providing additional monitoring in accordance with DOE's concerns. And we're also going to be contracting with, as pointed out, with Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, the city and county of San Francisco, and the city of Oakland to be the provider in those areas. And we're in negotiation and completing a contract with a firm called Project Go to basically provide coverage for El Dorado County. So we're moving. We will have those contracts executed by June 30th. And we are hopeful that we will, when our next report comes out, which will be shortly, that you will be pleasantly surprised. We're going to have more pleasant surprises, though, as more reports come out, because we're going to have to move up the pace so that we can meet the tests that we have. The amount of money we estimated originally that it would cost to weatherize each home on average would be around $3,500. It's substantially less than that. And that will be mitigated partially by some of the urban areas who will be doing multifamily, more density of multifamily homes, which we believe will increase the average cost per home. I mean, per unit, not home, per unit. If you have a 50-unit apartment complex, you may have to change the boiler, may have to do things that are much larger than what you would normally have to do in a smaller facility. But I think the State Bureau of Audits has done a good job in pointing out areas where we needed to have additional work. On the quality assurance, we are going to contract with our current contractor for the first 120 days so that we can gear up and train, whether it's the Department of Housing and Community Development or the Department of General Services or local providers. But we're going to have to, once we get contracts, we're going to have to provide training so that they can meet the protocols that the Department of Energy has established. The one area that I found interesting in that a lot of our providers were not particularly thrilled with some of the provisions like Davis-Bacon, but we've really brought the majority along, and we clearly have some laggards, and we have had a what did we call that? Webinar. I've never seen it, but it's it's all magic now. They had a webinar with all of our providers, and basically we told them that there are laggards. Those who are lagging may not get additional funding. For those who are doing better, they will get additional funding because we really have to make the estimates that we have. And we'll get a report back from them sometime toward the end of this month on where they expect to be through the first and second quarter of the next fiscal year, so that we'll have a better idea of how much we have to adjust by taking some down and moving some up. And I think with those kinds of adjustments, we will be successful in meeting our goal of 30%.
Could you also address the quality assurances issue? Because I think that's another problem. It's not just that we have to have 30% done by September 30th. It's that 5% of those 30% also have to be checked for quality.
Right.
And it doesn't sound like that process is as far along as it should be.
Well, what DOE said in its report that we asked for, the report that we asked for, said that they believe that the way we had set it up was a conflict of interest. And what the report says is that we should change as soon as practicable to get a new quality assurance. So on the interim, to make sure that we do the 5%, we're going to contract at least for 120 days with Heath and Associates.
So they've allowed you to do that contract?
We believe they will.
They have already allowed you, or that you believe they will allow you?
As Director Allenby stated in the report, it acknowledges the importance of QA and that QA has to be done timely and also proportionate to the number of projects that are being completed within the state. So in the report, it did identify that Richard Heath, there was a conflict of interest, as well as that it provided. It acknowledged that the department should try to make changes as soon as practicable, to mitigate the conflict of interest. So basically what we are doing now is what Director Allenby has stated, that our efforts are going to be to continue to work with RHA to have them continue to provide QA inspections on an interim basis for the next 90 to 120 days. At the same time, we will be entering into contract with HCD, DGS to bring them on board to provide the QA inspections long-term, and as well as we're looking at possibly bringing on private home inspectors or whatnot. That may be another resource at our disposal that we could utilize to provide the QA. But we also recognize that we're in a position now that we need to continue to perform QA inspections ongoingly.
Well, let me just ask, we know that you had about 2,934 homes that were actually weatherized before March 31st. How many of those have already been QA'd? Did we reach the 5% goal for those homes?
No. None of the homes that have been weatherized to date have been QA'd or subject to the 5% review. But I do want to acknowledge that one of the changes that we did institute with the DOE ARA program is that we've established QA programs within each of the individual contractors. So prior to ARA, none of our agencies had dedicated inspectors to inspect their own work. And with ARA, we have established that as a requirement. We have provided training to establish, dedicated inspectors that would do the QA. But to answer your question, no, we have not.
Respectfully, I don't think that's enough. Having QA of your own work, you should be doing that anyway.
Right.
Having an independent, verifiable entity that doesn't have a conflict, that does the QA before September 30th of 5% of the total inventory, that is a big project because these houses aren't all 50-unit dense urban areas. They are spread out all over the state, and if you don't have somebody who can run around the state that can do that QA, this to me is a big red flag of one of the potential ways we lose that second batch of funding. So I can't emphasize enough how important it is that QA starts happening. If you've got somebody under contract, even for the next 90 to 120 days, I want to hear how many houses have actually been QA'd. Because otherwise, I don't know why you stay with them and don't just have the next group do it, because you're still going to have a reason to doubt the QA when the person who the company that trained people is just going to say, yes, you did what we trained you to do. And there's less of that check and balance between how they were trained to do it, and then how the quality assurance was tested at the end.
It's a matter of weighing. I mean, we know that we're going to be able to contract with HCD and Department of General Services. What we don't know right now is how long it's going to take to do the proper protocol so that they have reasonable training. That's the problem.
Well, the reasonable training, I think, is a separate issue. That's not the training.
On quality assurance.
Right? Right, but when it is questionable about whether or not that quality assurance doesn't have a conflict problem, I think it depends on how many houses they do, right? If you're able to get the next guys up and running, do the 5% plus a little extra, because at this point they haven't done any. I mean, they haven't done any of them. So it may be more expedient and better for California for getting our next portion of the ARA funds to say we completely eliminated that problem. There was a risk of that problem. I get we're on a tight time frame, but we've already wasted some of those days because we know we had all those homes that were weatherized in the first quarter and none of them have been QA'd. So I'm really concerned about the speed by which we're going to get that done and whether we're actually going to meet the deadline or if we're at risk of losing those funds. I mean, for multiple reasons. One, for the 30%, getting the 30% done, which you seem pretty confident that we're going to be able to do once you get these additional service providers on the line. But the QA seems so much farther behind to me.
Okay, thank you.
Other than those issues, I think we'll be just following up and again, want to thank you for taking the auditor's recommendations and looking at what you're doing and making sure that we're trying to correct some of those issues. If anything comes up, the same offer applies to you as to the previous commission, that if you have something that's legislative that's getting in the way, let us know. Your problems seem to be much more related to having the service providers to actually implement and do the work, having the definition of what things you can do when you're in a home that's going to change the total numbers of homes that you have weatherized, and getting that quality assurance stuff. Get it going as quick as possible. If you've got to get dedicated staff working just that problem, get it going.
We will have the protocol changes on the audit side to DOE by the 15th.
Okay. I'm more worried about when they get us a response because the deadline's not going to change. It's still going to be September 30th regardless.
You're right.
Okay. Thank you very much. The final item on our agenda is regarding the Edward Byrne, right? I'm saying that correct. No? Memorial Justice Assistance Grant Program, commonly referred to as the JAG program. And the California Emergency Management Agency was awarded $136 million for the JAG program. With us today is from the agency's Deputy Director Brendan Murphy. I am going to have the auditor go first. She's doing a great job of highlighting kind of some of the issues and where we are at the current status, and then I will have Mr. Murphy address the auditor's concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you indicated, this is an audit that we did of the Edward Byrne JAG program, Justice Assistance Program. This audit report we issued relatively recently. It went out on May 4th of this year, so we weren't even expecting a 60-day response from the agency, but based on their initial response they provided to the report when we published it on May 4th, we wanted to do a little bit of follow-up work in a couple of areas, and I'll talk about those in a second. Let me go through the audit highlights. As you know, when we conducted these audits, we were determining how well agencies were prepared, and we felt that CalEMA was moderately prepared. One of the concerns we had, similar to some of the other reports, was how quickly they were awarding grants and identifying subrecipients for these funds. As you indicated, Madam Chair, the U.S. DOJ allocated $136 million to CalEMA. Another $89 million went directly to local government. So the state of California in total received $225 million, but CalEMA is responsible for administering about $135, almost $136 million. The award California received in June of 2009, so when we issued this report in May, we identified as of February that CalEMA had only awarded about 4 subgrants, totaling about $4 million. When they responded to us initially, they said, we've already awarded another 52 grants. So we went in and took a look at that to make sure that they weren't cutting any corners. So how could you go from 4 to another 52? And I have to say, when my staff went in and looked at their protocols, we determined that the agency followed their protocols. So they had not cut any corners. They were able to award those additional 52. So funding went from $4 million to $31 million. Other concerns that we raised in the report is that the monitoring again. Having a good plan for performing monitoring. There are various types of monitoring activities that need to happen. In this particular program, many other programs, it's called during the award monitoring. So you don't wait until the money's out the door. You don't wait until the program is over. You're monitoring as these programs are being administered. And we felt that CalEMA needed to develop a better program and protocol for conducting monitoring during the award rather than after the fact. They were required to put together some estimates of the number of staff they would need to administer the program and conduct some of this monitoring, and we felt that they needed to do a better job, and you'll see in the recommendations that we address that. And then the reporting requirements, as I'm sure you're aware, there are very specific reporting requirements under the Recovery Act for not only reporting to the U.S. Department of Justice, who awarded California these funds, but also the Recovery Board, which has some major responsibilities under the Recovery Act. And what we found is some information reported to the U.S. DOJ differed than what they reported to the Recovery Board. The problem was it was two different divisions within CalEMA, so we're saying you need to do a better job of communicating and doing some QC on your reporting before you submit that information to the federal government so you don't have conflicting information being sent from California. So those were the key issues that we had. First recommendation, execute more sub-grant agreements. In their response to us on April 20th, they indicated that they had actually executed 204 out of 226. So we went from 4 when we were conducting the audit, another 52 towards the end of the field work for our first audit, and then as of April, saying another 204. So again, my concern was, are we cutting any corners? So we did some follow-up work and identified that CalEMA, in fact, they did follow their procedures, in our opinion, did a good job of making sure that they followed proper protocols and got those sub-grants awarded relatively quickly. They still have a few left, but we felt that they are following their protocols and practices. The monitoring activities that I was talking about as far as during the award monitoring, we made a recommendation that they make sure that their monitoring activities are satisfying the Recovery Act requirements. We had very specific recommendations about establishing proper monitoring and having planning in place. Since the audit was issued shortly ago, May 4th, we didn't follow up on this particular area, but we certainly will as the agency reports back to us to make sure that monitoring improves and that they do have good plans in place. But I don't have anything to report on that today. As far as identifying the workload standards and the number of staff, during the audit, CalEMA gave us some examples of what they felt were measurement tools for identifying workload, identifying staffing. We, quite frankly, took a look at those and weren't convinced that that's what was necessary or that really satisfied or was convincing information to present to the legislature, because part of this was CalEMA asking the legislature to authorize some funding for additional staff to administer the program. So we felt that they needed to do a better job of putting together some workload measurement tools to really have a strong, solid foundation for providing information to the legislature to get the funding for additional staffing. And then the last area was about the reporting and making sure that they have procedures in place to make sure that these different divisions within CalEMA that have reporting responsibilities to different federal agencies are communicating with one another, and that the message being sent from California is consistent and that the information being reported is accurate. We followed up on this and found that CalEMA actually had revised their accounting, their reporting protocols. They actually have some specific requirements now in those protocols that require staff to communicate with one another and review and reconcile any differences. So if one division is intending to report certain information and it differs from the other division, they now have a process for those divisions to sit down and talk to each other and try to reconcile why, at least know why there are differences, and perhaps correct any problems or errors in any of the data. So, as I said, this report we issued relatively recently, but we felt that there was some information that was important for the committee to know, particularly related to the grants. We think they have followed their process. They have done a very good job of awarding and executing those grant agreements. Still have a few left to go, but we still want to see some improvement in the subrecipient monitoring, planning for that, and certainly the measurement tools as far as the workload and the staffing needs to be able to administer the JAG program. So with that, I'll allow the department or answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. She doesn't give out high praise and compliments that easily, so good job on the things that were highlighted as you actually were able to correct from the initial audit, but wanted to at least address those couple of concerns that remain.
So I'm Brendan Murphy from the California Emergency Management Agency. I'm the Director of Grants Management there. I'd like to start off by thanking the committee for having us here. Thank you, Madam Chair, and obviously the state auditor. And we had we took some big highlights and some things that were quite obvious. And I'm going to kind of start from, I don't want to say low-hanging fruit, but the easiest one to really understand is the critique of our reporting requirements. And essentially, Ms. Howell just nailed it. We had two separate units reporting at two different times, but similar information. And what happened in that report was fairly obvious, and so it was something that we could get together and correct in an efficient, somewhat efficient manner. Sit down, put everybody in a room, and said, okay, set the process for how you're going to report. Make it simple, make it understandable for everybody, but repeat it time and time again. So that was what we did, and I was happy to hear. We actually ran each other in the elevator. I was happy to hear that what we'd sent over had met that criteria. And I'm excited. The other one is the actual awarding of the subgrant award agreements. We kind of maintained all the way from the beginning. I know you weren't there, but I testified in front of the Senate Budget Committee in January, and to the extent that this is a process, and where the process was given a couple of different factors that they're in the report, but the subgrant award agreements. We're building to a crescendo of, during the spring, you would see a number of subgrant award agreements that we're going into award. As auditors, obviously, and I don't blame them at all, you can't, okay, you have 32 done. Yeah, okay, that's sure. We'll see another 200 in the next 60 days. Yeah, right. The good news was we really did see another 200 in the next 60 days. So, and I thank the state auditor for being so kind as to actually send her staff back out so we could be here with some firm numbers and say, look, we really did try very hard to follow our process and set a static process in place so we could get to where we're at now. With that, we are in the process. We actually have a monitoring plan that's developed. We have made some assumptions in workload that initially we talked about with Ms. Howell's staff, and I think that it would be premature for me to give it to anybody at this point because we really do want to test it this month. And I will point out that one of the delays in implementation would be a lack of an extended budget delay, in that I can't have staff travel without a budget to reimburse them. So, but we do have a monitoring plan in place that takes into account doing the in-award monitoring, as well as some fiscal monitoring of all of the 226 subrecipients. So that is what we're testing. We're going to have to tweak it probably based on some of the in-field work as we get out there. As anybody who's done audits knows, once they get in the field and actually see some stuff, we're going to have some timing changes that'll go on. And I want to make sure we get it to all 226 in the 2 to 3 years that these grants last. And with that, I will lead to kind of the last point, which is the staffing issue. And until I have some tested, verifiable numbers on how long these monitorings are going to take, I won't have a finite staffing number. I want to rehash history. We can argue the validity of old numbers, but the reality is now we have a plan that's actionable, and that's where we're moving forward. We will work with the task force, as we indicated in our initial response, to ensure that we have any staffing conditions met going forward. Tentatively speaking, I think we have a solid plan for right now. Obviously, as I said, as we test how long it's going to take to do some of these monitorings, we may have to readjust that.
Great, thank you. It is nice to have some good news when you have a follow-up on an audit. I want to take some time to invite the public to make any comments on any of the auditor's recommendations or any of the response from the different programs and commissions, if there's anyone. If there's not, then this concludes our agenda for today, and I want to thank everyone for participating, and we'll be continuing to monitor the use of the ARA funds to ensure that we're getting the most out of this funding and do what we can to stabilize our state's economy and that we're not at risk of losing additional funds. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
This concludes us. I guess that means